Howdy. I came down on the subway. I was by far the oldest and the only person with a suit and tie. I was quite nervous, but I see I'm still the only person with a suit and tie. So I'm still nervous. Grantham Foundation, 25 years old. The Grantham family's put in 90% of what we have. We've committed half of the remainder. And the objective of the foundation is to be basically the shock troops. We are, in a word, fanatics. Our grant making is done faster, more intensively, riskier, and more important than anybody else. And our investment portfolio basically is unlike any other philanthropy. 50% of our total is in climate technology. And there again, we only invest in ideas that if they work, they will be dramatic. And we will live with the loss quite happily and treat it like a grant. And if it wins on average, it comes back with interest. It's a brilliant way to invest the principle of a foundation, and it's totally ignored by almost every foundation. We consider a good green tech dollar to be every bit as good as a grant-making dollar, and we consider them all in one spectrum, smoothly moving from grants to commercialization, where we have 25 investments at the very edge of commercialization. We go into the great research universities and we say, who needs a push to get over the edge? And Stanford, MIT, and plenty of less illustrious organizations, they have suitable investments. They just need a kick, we provide the kick, and then we turn up for the seed round, knowing what we're doing. And here we are. Of course, we support Project Inner Space and Jamie Beard. It's ideal, it's important, it's getting started. That's what we do. We start important things. And there's nothing that much more important that I can think of than geothermal. The enemy, capitalism basically, have a vested interest in foot-dragging the greening of the economy. And they do it very well. A lot of experience, a lot of money, and frankly, they're completely ruthless. You don't expect to get much juice out of capitalists unless you can produce pressure from their customers, which sometimes work, and pressure from regulation, which often works. The problem in the US today is they control the regulators. And so life is tough, and their propaganda is effective. And what their propaganda says is wind and solar, which are the cheapest form of energy on the planet almost everywhere, certainly in the US, cheaper than coal by a lot, and natural gas now by a little. And they say, yes, but they're intermittent. If you had a sensible grid, sensible demand function and supply function, where you pay for time of day, etc., we already have the technology that would be sufficient. But they project so powerfully this image of the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, it's all a waste of time, even though storage has been falling in price faster than solar or wind. They're all dramatically declining, guaranteeing that they will be useful. But they're intermittent, says the enemy, and that's become the dominant theme. We really, really need permanent supply. And geothermal, natural hydrogen, fusion, the list is not long. And this one in particular has the huge potential leverage that it can bring in the skill set and perhaps one day the capital from the fossil fuel industry. Indeed, it may be a kind of lifeline to their capital and labor. And they have drilled 200,000 fracking wells. And the learning curve from trial and error and experience has just been prodigious. People always underestimate that. As you scale up and you try and money's on the line, you get terrific improvements. And we have to somehow piggyback off that huge body of knowledge that no one thought would have proceeded at this speed. Fracking, by the way, is getting oil and gas out of solid rock. 50 years ago, everyone thought it was utterly impossible. If we can take growing amounts of that talent, and maybe one day capital, we can look forward, I think, to a future where it is extremely likely that we will broaden the area where you can tap into 24-hour geothermal and hence electricity. And the arguments of the climate deniers and the obfuscators will be blown away. In the larger scheme of things, we have to say we are not winning the battle to survive as a coherent civilization. We have steadily been losing, I think, over the 25 years of our foundation. And it's been fairly shocking, the lack of progress. There was more CO2 particles put into the atmosphere last year than any year in the history of man. This is not terrific progress in 25 years. We haven't even bent the first derivative curve. We must do better. If you don't know it, we are officially desperate as a species. The story of CO2 and crazy humans is really the central theme here. CO2 is an amazing trapper of heat. If there was no CO2, we'd be at minus 25 degrees centigrade, and maybe there'd be bacteria, possibly nothing. So the difference between that and 280 parts per million is very fortunate. We owe a lot to the fact that CO2 is an efficient trapper of heat. When there were 2 miles of ice here a mere 20,000 years ago, there was 180 parts per million CO2. As we entered the interglacial, this amazing, fairly stable last 14,000 years, there was 280. That gap was just 100 parts per million. We're now at 423. We've added 140 parts. We've added more than the difference between 2 miles of ice and a beautiful interglacial. It's an incredible experiment. Before we've finished, we will have doubled that. My colleague here and I have beavered away, and we think if we improve slightly at the rate we're improving, we will get to carbon zero at 550 parts per million. If we're lucky, that will be just below 3 degrees centigrade. And you have seen how everything is escalating. You cannot guarantee that tipping points will not go at any time. In fact, we think it's quite likely that 2 or 3 have already tipped and will need to be fixed by withdrawing all that CO2 from the atmosphere one day. And if we don't, by the way, the oceans will continue to rise. Even at zero emissions, will continue to rise for a few hundred years until it's up by 8, 9, 10 feet, up to 20 feet. We have to take out 2.5 trillion tons of CO2. It is going to be a very difficult race. Technologies are moving faster than we ever thought. We've been thoroughly amazed by the number of ingenious developments and the rate of progress in wind, solar, particularly storage, EVs, everything. EVs are now far and away, dollar for dollar, the best vehicle you can buy, and they're dropping like a stone, and they're virtually half price in China today. China, by the way, is leading the charge on everything green. It's a fashion in the US to knock everything Chinese and say they're still building coal plants. They put in more solar last year than the US and Canada have ever put in cumulatively. They put in 75% of the wind that the US has put in 50 years. They build half the EVs and 90% of the electric buses. It is ludicrous to view them as anything else other than the leader commercially in technology. They now file, can you believe, more professional papers on green technology than the US. They now file more professional papers in senior peer-reviewed journals than the US. In 2000, they were not 1% of peer-reviewed articles. The US was dominant, and in a puny 23 years, they have gone from next to nothing to leading. So back to business. We need technology, we need diversified everything, natural hydrogen, fusion, and above all, geothermal. We need everybody's effort, we need everybody's money. This is a very, very closely run race, and we have to do better than we have done, and maybe Jamie Beard will do just that. Thank you.